Anyway, so I want to thank you, Paul, for coming and joining us today. And you know, I think the job you're doing, from what I can see at my end, is really important for all of us in the ecosystem, at least those of us in the United States, if not globally, frankly. Hopefully, if you'd introduce yourself, you'd tell us a little bit about what you do. You'll just take it from there, and I'll get out of your way. One question before we get started, though, is do you want to be interrupted, or do you want questions and that sort of thing at the end?
I very much prefer to be interrupted. I think I'm planning for this to be an informal conversation. I do have slides, but that's more to help me structure my own thinking than anything else, and so that you have something to share with people if they're interested. I welcome people jumping in, and just feel free to pipe on up, and I'll be happy to engage. And if we go off on an extended tangent, that's fine. That's no problem.
Okay, so the challenge is yours, audience and participants and friends. So help get the conversation going. Don't wait. The mute button is unmutable, I guess you could say that. So by all means, just chime in instead of using a chat and all that kind of good stuff. All right. So Paul, it's all yours. Thanks again for coming coming to us.
Well, thank you very much. So my name is Paul Stimers. I'm the Executive Director of the Quantum Industry Coalition and a partner at the global law firm of K&L Gates, where I've been for the last 18 years. And my practice, I'm an attorney in the public policy practice, which means I bother Congress and the administration on a regular basis, mostly in areas related to advanced technology, in particular commercial spaceflight and quantum computing. So just a quick pair of preliminaries. To begin with, I'm not providing legal advice on this call. None of you is my client. Any opinions I express are strictly my own, not necessarily the firm's or the quantum industry coalitions. Just by way of a little further background, what is the Quantum Industry Coalition? It's a group of companies involved in one or more areas in quantum technology fields that support U.S. leadership in those fields. I say here it's quantum ecumenical. We don't care what kind of quantum you're doing or how you're doing it, just that you're involved in quantum. We don't care if it's photonics or whatever. What we do care about is that members have to be businesses. It's a business-focused organization because we think it's very important that the business voice be present in discussions about what to do in quantum policy. We've seen that it's actually quite easy for the academic voice to take over in some ways R&D policy discussions. And there's nothing wrong with the academic voice, but I think it needs to be balanced by a business perspective. And then our objective is to lobby for policies that promote U.S. quantum leadership, and we'll talk about that. So my website's at the bottom. As a note, we're not a web design coalition. It's a very, very rudimentary website, but you're welcome to visit it and see a little bit more about what we do. So what we have done is we helped draft and pass the National Quantum Initiative Act of 2018, and I'll talk a little bit more later on about what all that bill did if we end up having time to discuss that. We've also shared some thoughts about what should be included in the National Defense Authorization Act. As I'm sure you're aware, every year Congress passes a defense bill, a National Defense Authorization Act, that says what we're going to do from a Defense Department perspective every year. And so that includes, for the last 3 years now, quantum provisions, and we've had some input on those. We also provide input on the appropriations bills. So NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, authorizes activities, and then the appropriations bills fund those activities, provide funding for those activities. and so we have to play on both sides. And that's both on the defense side and on the non-defense side, whether it's the Commerce Department and NIST and NSF, or on the Department of Energy side. And then our members have testified before Congress about quantum technology and policy, and tried to help members of Congress who have to be responsible for understanding pretty much everything get up to speed on what is quantum and how does it work and why is it important. So we're going to explore some of the current issues in U.S. quantum policy, and these are, broadly speaking, what they are. They're one of the main things is just helping people understand those fundamentals, as I was just saying, and then exploring the opportunities and threats, and then figuring out how we try to help ensure U.S. leadership in quantum technology. So the first thing to do is help people understand what is quantum. What are we talking about in a way that is both accessible to a layperson and meaningfully correct. And so we spend a lot of time trying to get from the sort of graduate level down to middle schoolish, and try to help people conceptualize, even if they don't necessarily have time to digest the mechanics and so forth, at least conceptualize what's going on. And we've spent a fair amount of time, and our members have spent a fair amount of time individually figuring out ways to do that. Once we have that down, we move to why it's important. And it's really from two perspectives. The first is the policy. What does it mean to have quantum leadership? What does it mean to have the capabilities that we're trying to develop from a policy perspective? And then second, what does this mean for your constituents? If you're a member of Congress, how is this going to affect your local economy? Are there employers in your district that are going to benefit from quantum leadership in one way or another? Are there particular interests that you need to take into account? And then, or from the administration's perspective, are there particular interest groups that have a stake here that need to be paid attention to? And then, of course, we get to, okay, now that we understand what it is and why it's important, what kinds of policies actually are going to have an impact? What are the kinds of things that we can do to make sure that we are actually helping? When I founded the Quantum Industry Coalition, I called up a bunch of quantum companies and said, hey, do you want to come over and sit down and have a conversation about whether we should have a national quantum initiative? And I was delighted that a bunch of companies sent people, and we literally sat down for about an hour and a half in my office in DC. And the first question was, do we want the federal government more involved in this space? Because we can't always take for granted that that's going to be helpful. So that was sort of the premise was, let's test that assumption, and then move on to what then should we do about it? What sorts of policies should we recommend? And the first policy that we recommended was a national initiative. I was involved in the National Nanotechnology Initiative and the creation and codification of the National Nanotechnology Initiative at the turn of the millennium through the 21st Century Nanotechnology Research and Development Act. And as I was looking around about 4 years ago, I started seeing the same sorts of things environmentally around the quantum fields that I had seen back then around the nanotechnology field. Number one, it was a there were a lot of different companies of different sizes doing lots of different things in the space, all of whom vehemently disagreed with each other about which one was going to work. Number two was that there was some federal involvement, some federal R&D money, some thinking going on, but it was not in any way unified or strategically organized. Number three, there was a significant national security aspect at play. In terms of nanotechnology, some of the various coatings and capabilities contributed significantly to things like stealth and CDR, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense, and a few other things along those lines. Here in quantum, as we'll see, there are significant national security implications. And then finally, a significant international competition angle. We certainly saw that in nanotech, and as Carol has indicated, we are seeing that in quantum as well. So I thought to myself, hey, why don't we just replicate the playbook from 20 years ago and go for the National Quantum Initiative? The group came together around a number of ideas along those lines, and we went to see the House Science Committee, and they said, funny you should stop by right now. Here's an early draft of the National Quantum Initiative Act. What do you think? And we had an opportunity to provide substantial input into that draft and support it and help it get passed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But those were some of the beginning building blocks of what to do about quantum technology. We think it's very important to look at what our competitors are doing. We've already talked about China. China has had quite a focus on quantum technology, in particular quantum networking, and whether it's their quantum broadband trunk or their Mesius satellite, and certainly they've announced and are beginning to fund a $10 billion quantum center. So those are three very significant commitments on their part, and demonstrations in two of those cases already. And we want to make sure that we are paying close attention to that. That doesn't necessarily mean we should try to do exactly what they're doing. We think we have a greater likelihood of success and of impact in other areas of quantum research and development than China is currently focusing on. But it's still important to keep an eye on what they're doing. And that's not to say China is the only competitor we need to be watching. There are quite a few others. And we also need to keep an eye on and work as closely as we can with our various allies. Most closely the Five Eyes, but also our NATO allies and even beyond. There's a lot of excellent work being done. A lot of our friends are ahead of us in various places, and we need their help, no question about it. So some of the opportunities surrounding quantum, and forgive me, I'm assuming a fair degree of quantum fluency within the audience, but please don't hesitate to jump in and either say, Paul, we know all this already, or can you just explain one thing or another, and I'd be happy to back up or drill down or what have you.
Yeah, Paul, this is a fairly knowledgeable group with general, but feel free to take a deep dive in any aspect you want to delve into.
All right, thank you.
It's okay.
Well, so I'll skim through this. Obviously, there are substantial new capabilities for R&D optimization and logistics. With respect to national security, we'll get into that a little bit more. But the primary near-term applications are in clocks and sensors and quantum post-quantum encryption, and the longer-term applications are more along the lines of quantum computing and to some degree quantum networks. But the real interesting thing here, I think, is the unexpected applications. It's, I think, fair to say that we really have very little idea of how this is actually going to go. Just as we had no real idea what the internet was for, or would turn out to be for, I don't think we have a very clear idea of what quantum is going to turn out to be.
And and really we're still figuring out what the internet is for. So this is not a single decade. This is perhaps generations long. You're talking.
Absolutely. Jeff Bezos talks all the time about how today is still day one of the internet. And in fact, the headquarters building for Amazon is the day one building. And his point, and I forget if it was last year's shareholder letter or the year before, talked about the difference between day one and day two companies. His point is that it's vital for Amazon, and at this point a very old company in terms of the internet, to continue to attack the internet and the marketplace as if it were still day one, because so much is still just at the very beginning of development. I think of the quantum realm as being in second one. We're just at the very fundamental beginnings of the marketplace for quantum, and not too much farther than that for the national security implications. And so we have to be very humble about our predictions. And I think by being humble, that forces us to focus on building blocks that will be very versatile, rather than trying to construct something that will not last, that will not be that will lock us into a certain path or a certain set of technologies. And that's something that in my practice for the last 20 years I've tried to stay true to. The idea that we don't want to have technology mandates or lock ourselves into anything is a very powerful and so far very helpful idea. So threats. Certainly we have new hazards from national security adversaries. One of the most substantial ones, of course, is quantum decryption and the ability to, at some future date, use a general quantum computer and Shor's algorithm or something similar to break RSA security and decrypt messages, not only messages then, but messages now that have been intercepted, stored in encrypted form, and are just sitting around waiting for the adversary to decrypt and read them. Certainly, to some extent, time will degrade the sensitivity of those messages, but not nearly as much as we would like. And so we're in the situation now, and it's kind of a bizarre situation. We're in the situation now where we have experienced breaches, the damage from which we will not feel until the future. But it is almost impossible for us to undo that damage. We can only mitigate it going forward. Undoing it would require essentially destroying the network that encrypted information sits on, and that's probably not possible in our adversary's possession. So we are already in a disadvantaged position, and the time to stop the bleeding, which we won't even notice for years potentially, is now. which makes post-quantum encryption a very important thing to develop. We also have to be prepared for the use of quantum capabilities by our national security adversaries and competitors. And that will take a number of forms that we can have a conversation about. We also need to be prepared for our economic competitors to put quantum computing in particular to economic use and to use it to optimize their own capabilities, their logistics, their R&D pipelines, and so forth, and just use it as a competitive edge that we will have to match or beat. And then, just as before, we have to be aware of the unintended consequences here. And it's, again, devilishly difficult to predict those. And it seems that when you try to account for certain unintended consequences, just as when you're going bug hunting in code, you create a couple of new unintended consequences for every one that you squash. So again, being humble about that and being prepared to manage that and accept that there will be unintended consequences, accept that you can have them without that being blameworthy, and therefore address them in a way that is transparent and rapid is important. So how do we lead economically? Number one, I think it's important that we try our best to be first to the extent that we can. Quantum leadership to a large degree is going to be about being first. For what value of first? Well, that's an important question. We can win along any number of metrics, and of course we'll choose the metrics that are most favorable to our likelihood of winning, or we'll win at something and then announce that that was the metric afterward. But we also have to be best. And that's going to be a marketplace test. That's going to be a test in the marketplace of both economics and of ideas, and sort of the PR marketplace. We need to demonstrate that we have a worthwhile capability, that we have a suite of worthwhile capabilities, such that A, we're actually providing and producing results, and B, our allies want to work with us, our trading partners want to trade with us. We have to actually have something that is worthwhile. We need to be able to deploy quantum computing broadly. We can't just have the first best thing. It has to be disseminated. It has to be something where, I talk about this a lot in the context of commercial spaceflight. The difference between the Lewis and Clark expedition, between exploration on the one hand and the wagon trains and the gold rush expansion on the other. We need to not just explore but then expand, and that means broad access to and use of quantum capabilities throughout the economy. And that leads me to the final point. We need to be able to apply quantum computing to real-world problems. We need to have it matter. And that's a few steps down the line from demonstration projects in the lab, a very necessary step. But we need to be able to bring it to the marketplace. So we've talked a little bit about the new hazards that are created. I think I'll just skip through that. No, never mind. I'm going backwards. Okay, so bear with me here as I figure out my mouse wheel. U.S. leadership in national security. A little more on that. I mentioned the need to develop quantum capabilities, and the Pentagon is in the process of wrapping its arms around everything that's going on in the national security space, both the Department of Defense and the intelligence community on the quantum front. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the characteristics of quantum, like with nanotech and really with any new large-scale technological advancement, is there's a lot of stuff going on and not a lot of coordination at the beginning, because everybody's just sort of got this little project that they're noodling through. And so the Pentagon's now, and for the last couple of years, been trying to pull everything together and really wrap their arms around, okay, what are we doing, and how do we make sense of it and apply a strategy to it so that we're filling gaps, that we're deconflicting overlaps in our research, and that we have an idea of where we're headed and why. And what we want to be able to do is apply the strategy, apply the resources to the strategy, and aim toward what we believe is the areas where we're going to have a near and midterm high-value military impact. So one of the things that is most worrisome to the Department of Defense, and again this goes back to my space hat, is that functionally all of the ways in which we project power as a nation depend on our space assets. And I'll get to why this is important in quantum in just a second. So our ability to project power depends on, in large part, on two sets of acronyms, two acronyms. One is C4ISR, which stands for Command, Control, Computing, Communications, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. That's the sort of brain of the Defense Department right there. Command, Control, Computing, Communications, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. All of that, every single one of those words depends to one degree or another, and in some cases almost entirely, on space assets. The second acronym is PNT, Positioning, Navigation, and Timing. That's how we figure out where we are, when we are, and how to get from where we are to where we want to be. And that also depends entirely on our space assets. The third major acronym that our power projection depends on is POL, Petroleum, Oil, and Lubricants. That doesn't depend on space very much. But the first two really do. And our adversaries know this, and they have a plan for dealing with that requirement on our part, and they have shown that they can execute on that plan. Both Russia and China have demonstrated, as has India, have demonstrated the ability to destroy satellites in orbit. And Russia and China have also demonstrated other capabilities related to disabling or otherwise interfering with our satellites in orbit. The Pentagon knows this, obviously. So a big push for the Pentagon is how do we, on the one hand, make our space capabilities more resilient? How do we improve our ability to launch rapidly and responsibly? How do we disseminate our constellations of satellites so that you have to hit a full bunch of relatively cheap satellites rather than just one exquisitely expensive and capable satellite? All sorts of capabilities like that. Can we repair satellites on orbit? Can we move them? Can we upgrade them on orbit? That sort of thing. At the same time, we're trying to reduce our dependence on space. And one of the ways to do that is to be able to replace, at least in the short term, the global positioning system, the GPS, with other non-space capabilities. So right now our PNT, our positioning, navigation, and timing system, depends on the GPS network. And we've seen that our friends and our adversaries are developing their own non-GPS space-based capabilities. And we are developing not only our GPS network itself, continuing to develop that, but the capability to navigate outside of GPS. And quantum clocks and sensors are some of the key ways that we're trying to do that. So quantum clocks obviously are the ability to tell when you are. If we can synchronize our watches and to sort of bring it back to, I don't know, 1970s and 80s TV show, Mission Impossible and things like that, and not have to resync for a longer and longer time because our clocks are more and more accurate over time, then that's part of the foundation for figuring out when we are with respect to each other. Then, if we can pair those clocks with very accurate sensors that can tell us not just where we are, but also our altitude, and that requires understanding the masses below us, as well as very good maps, sort of like the runs in the Hunt for Red October. If we can do all of that, then at least in the short to medium term, we can operate in a GPS-denied environment. And if we can do that, then we can hopefully deter our adversaries from trying to take out the GPS, which is a good thing. In the medium to longer term, because there's a lot of work going into that, and we do expect to see some significant developments in the near term on those. In the medium and longer term, it's about computing and decryption. First of all, we are obviously looking toward a generally capable quantum computer, one that can be helpful even before we get to that point in terms of the logistics side. Forget who it was that said amateurs discuss tactics, professionals discuss logistics when it comes to war. That's certainly true. And Eisenhower's great gift was that he was an extraordinary logistician. Quantum computing can help with that tremendously, of course. And then when we get to decryption, when we get to the ability to read the other guy's mail, so much the better from our perspective. But of course, this is a never-ending race, and so we have to defend against the adversaries' quantum capabilities. And to begin with, that means, as I said, we need post-quantum encryption right now. Ideally, we need post-quantum encryption that is capable of being applied along with good old run-of-the-mill RSA AES encryption to the Internet of Things, which is a huge vulnerability for us right now. But at the very least, we need post-quantum encryption for our actual computer networks that are not just IoT, that are really, are what we think of as our actual computer. And then in the medium and longer term, we'll get around to the quantum networks that China's working on. It's been interesting to see that DoD and the intelligence community don't seem to feel that there's as much national security value there as China does. And I'm not going to get into or speculate as to why they believe that, but it is a pretty widely held belief. So moving on, the other aspect.
Hi, Paul. John Zur here with a question.
Hi, John.
On the national security topic, a few decades ago, national security really drove our research and development and technology development. Very much not the case today with the commercial sector really leading how the development shakes out. Do you have any thoughts on how you see those two sectors working together in a much different sort of environment to make these advancements that we need?
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a really interesting question. And that's right at the nexus of a lot of my practice, both in quantum and in space and elsewhere in IT. Because I do spend a lot of time arguing to the government, whether it's an agency or to Congress, that America's national security apparatus can really use the burgeoning commercial capabilities in these new fields as a force multiplier, and the more that government can be a customer for capabilities that the private sector is developing, the more it can A, move quickly, B, save money, and C, obfuscate. it can sort of hide in plain sight in ways that can be helpful. I think, you know, and there's been a lot of movement in that direction. I think you can see that in the national security space side with the National Security Space Launch Program, for example, where all of a sudden we're moving from government-owned and operated rockets to the government as a customer with a national security payload on a private sector rocket, whether it's the United Launch Alliance, which is Boeing and Lockheed joint venture, or SpaceX or Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' rocket company. And so all of a sudden you've got this much more robust capability. Because as amazing as ULA has been, and they have a perfect launch record, which is absolutely unique, it's still nice to have 3 different capabilities, 2 of which are reusable. You have a much more robust, a much more highly defensible capability, and one that's evolving rapidly and adding capability all the time. And so we see that in space. We see responsive launch capabilities, the ability to launch a satellite within just a matter of days. From the time you pick up the phone and say I want to launch to actual launch is getting to where we can measure it almost in hours. If it's a small satellite, which is amazing. So applying that sort of capability to IT and to quantum and so forth is really powerful. I think we're still seeing, you're right that government is no longer driving the bus on this in terms of research and development, but they do have a nudge here and there. And most of those nudges are fairly quiet. They take the form perhaps of just funding, and a lot of it is on the classified side as well. But I think the real key, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but the real key is, can the government be an effective customer? And that's a very vexing question. It's been very difficult for the government to operate at the speed of business in the modern world. And that's something that the Defense Department has been working on, whether it's through SOCOM or through the Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, or through Undersecretary Lord's procurement chain of command more broadly. They're really trying to do a better job at that. Similarly, on the intelligence community side, you've got InQtel trying to really act as a venture capitalist and try to be as relevant and as user friendly as it can be in bringing on new technologies of interest to the intelligence community, and providing an on-ramp into that space. So there's a lot of work underway on that front. Still haven't figured out exactly how to do it. A big challenge there is it's lawyers, frankly. It's everybody, trying to make sure that the contracting process is all of the above, all of the below, rapid, transparent, fair, and providing honest to goodness best value to the government as opposed to just lowest cost or total cost of ownership or what have you. That's a hard set of things to balance. They're in tension with each other. And that's a tension that's never going to resolve. So we have to be a little bit patient. But to the extent that it can be managed, the private sector is a tremendous value to the government as it's seeking to meet its own national security objectives. So I hope that answers your question. I'll move to workforce unless folks want to stay on national security for a moment.
Hey man, I'm all workforce.
I know. Fantastic, and I'll say that I really appreciate the approach that you, Carol, and that Harrisburg University are taking to developing the quantum workforce. And excuse me, it's really, I think, forward-leaning on the part of the university and you in particular, but all the way up to your president. And we have a very senior colleague in our firm who's on the board of Harrisburg University, and he's just really thrilled with all the work that's being done on this front. So what we need, and I have to say, when I had that initial meeting of the Quantum Industry Coalition, or what would become the coalition, I was stunned, frankly, by the vehemence with which workforce development issues were set forth as a top priority. Companies involved in the quantum space are absolutely desperate for capable, qualified U.S. scientists, engineers, and so forth. It's a deeply felt, urgently felt need. And so from our perspective, we just need more. We need more scientists. We need more engineers. We need more software developers, and we need more application developers. As the quantum stack develops, and as we start to expand from the earliest quantum theorists all the way to the marketplace, we're building out the set of needs that we have. And the competition for the talent that's available is pretty fierce. We need to start early because, as you all know, it takes a long time to develop somebody into a quantum what have you. Really, we sort of need to start in middle school and get people on the right track. Because it's a very long track, and you can't sort of roll into undergraduate classes and say, yeah, I know Etruscan shards are interesting, but have you thought about math? But the flip side of that is that you can't roll into a middle school classroom and say, hey, how would you like to be a quantum scientist? And so from our perspective, it's balancing the ability to advocate on behalf of a very small industry at the moment, and say, yes, we need to do more quantum STEM outreach on the one hand, and on the other hand, the much, much bigger question of how do we do STEM outreach in general on the other. And so we're still working on sort of finding that sweet spot. But I think the dirty secret is there is no sweet spot. It's just this continuum between sort of the big end of the STEM funnel at elementary and middle school on down, and the various specializations that we'll have to compete with to get to the very end at quantum. One of the keys to that, as I remind my members to their annoyance, is the best way to get somebody to be interested in in the difficult course of study is to demonstrate that there are good jobs on the back end of it. And so there's a certain amount of organic growth that has to take place. We have to have something that a career counselor can point to and say, yes, you should consider going down this path because there's a way to make a living at the back end of it. We also get what we celebrate, and I say that K&L Gates has for a long time worked very closely with the USA Science and Engineering Festival. And I have to share a bit of a story about that. It was the brainchild of a serial entrepreneur named Larry Bach, who was one of the leading lights of the nanotechnology world and the biotechnology world in the early 2000s and late 90s. And he, when he wrapped up all of that, he decided to create the Science and Engineering Festival. He started it in California, and it grew to the point where just to get into the thing, there was about a 5-mile line of cars. So we brought it nationwide, and we helped him put it on the National Mall and then at the Washington Convention Center, where it brought literally hundreds of thousands of kids and their parents over the course of a weekend in to just learn about and celebrate science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we had like the Mythbusters and Mike Rowe, and it was a big thing. It happens every 18 months. This last one, we had this little pandemic thing that screwed that all up, but it also takes place around the country. They've got Nobel laureates talking to high school classrooms. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It is, as far as we can tell, the largest scientific gathering in the world at this point, and it's fantastic. And that's what I'm talking about. It's providing opportunities for kids. They've got, like, Discovery comes and brings penguins and just all sorts of random stuff. We've got the EPA and Lockheed and the Dean Kamen's robotics competition and auto manufacturers, and everybo's just there to do STEM stuff. That's the kind of thing that we want to see, and NASA's involved. So that kind of thing, and plugging the government into those efforts, coordinating it through the really cool agencies, through NASA, through NSF. NIST can be cool too. That's fine.
But Tom or Paul, I'm sorry. So I like the way you put that notion. You kind of crystallize that notion of you get what you celebrate, which is spot on. I get that and agree, and I like the way you just kind of crystallize it all there. And just for conversation's sake, at Harrisburg here, we're organizing a quantum swashbuckle. You've heard it here first, swashbuckle. And it's a 4-stage event, series of events over a few months' time. But the very last step is, in fact, called a quantum celebration, or I think I used the term swashbuckle celebration. And it is that. It's a series of training high school and undergraduate college students on quantum with some like camp type of thing. Then they go into a project phase where they work together. Undergraduates and high school students work together on a quantum project. They present that project after a month or so, all the details are being worked out, to an industry group of quantum industry folks, IBM down to the startups, and all that detail is getting worked out. Not specifically IBM yet, but then the last part is a celebration. And actually, I wanted to come back to you eventually. The celebration is where they announce the winners of the projects, and the parents are there and all that good stuff. But maybe get some of the government officials, some of the Congress people or their team to be a part of that in some way. I haven't worked out exactly what that looks like, but as you said, it's about the celebration part, and it's a very indirect way. I'm glad you gave that example, and I'll have to do some research on what NASA and others are doing, because I think that is an interesting way, an interesting lever to get young people involved. You know, us old people, we don't celebrate anything except the Super Bowl and a few other things, perhaps. But yeah, I think, you know, when you're dealing with young people, you got to be a little more creative. And, you know, and I'll take a look at that NASA stuff and those programs, because, you know, it's not like, you know, we're in quantum, but it doesn't mean we have to reinvent the rest of the wheel.
Yeah.
And I think we can learn a lot from the way others, and the bigger, as you brought up, if I may, the bigger STEM project, which has been a work in progress and is desperately a critical workforce development thing for the United States, you know, as a country, I think, going forward. It's becoming a serious problem. But I'm glad you brought that up, and hopefully, you know, I'll come back to you in a 45 days-ish time to talk about that celebration piece.
Well, and I think you'll find there is soon. I think we're going to see a real federal push on quantum education. I was just checking to see if there's been any news on that yet, and there's not. But keep your eyes open for that, and I think that will dovetail nicely with some of what you're doing. But that sounds fantastic. I'd love to be of any help that I can be. Either at the celebration level or in terms of just hooking folks up with companies.
Cool.
That's fantastic.
Cool. Anyway, any other comments, questions? Try to get some interactivity. As remember, we can celebrate some questions or some comments from the peanut gallery here. You know, and not to name names, Sean, but we do have a visitor here. We had this event during the day to try to grab the European crowd, but wouldn't you know it, we grabbed the South African crowd. So Sean, not to put any pressure on you, but you know, you had a comment or question in there a little earlier. If you want to shout it out, now would be the time. If you've got the microphone available. If not, we'll just. Yeah, I think, okay, I get, there we go.
Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can, Sean. Cool.
Hey, how's it? Sorry, it's very late in South Africa. Thank you. Just a quick question, Paul. When is America going to identify international guys coming to America to develop for quantum computing? Because when, as an international student, to get to America, you need 5 to 10 years worth of experience, which there's very few people that have actually that experience, and it's mostly in the hardware, not the software development. Is there anything on the horizon for that sort of legislation? Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Well, that's a great question. Thank you. And wish I had a happy answer for you. I don't. The challenge is that, well, there's a number of challenges. I actually sort of get to this in the next slide a little bit. You'll see it. In talking about intellectual property, I talk about export controls and immigration. We have our export control regime is important. We have a lot of technology that we are trying to make sure doesn't fall into the wrong hands. It is also, in many respects, outdated. It is designed for a world in which the United States generates all the technology and then tries to hermetically seal it. And for a while that was the case, to one order of approximation or another, and it worked reasonably well to one order of approximation or another. That's increasingly under stress, and it's increasingly counterproductive. And I'm not saying we need to scrap it, but I think it's something that needs a really hard look. There are proposals in development to try to make sure we're bringing contributing quantum scientists of various kinds and so forth to the United States, rather than forcing them to stay in countries that are at best friendly, but at worst competitors of ours, and get the benefit of their genius, their energy here rather than overseas. That would be wonderful. The trick for us, it would seem, is bringing folks who can contribute here while keeping folks who want to take our technology back there out. That's the trick. Speaking very nationalistically. And we're much more interested right now in the latter than in the former. And that's what gets counterproductive. And again, it's an irreducible tension, right? It's very difficult to finally calibrate that knob such that you're just getting good people and not getting people who are trying to, spies, who are coming in as students, theoretically, and have a mission to bring technology back to a competitive nation. That's the challenge. The vastly more difficult challenge is the politics surrounding immigration right now in the United States. You may have heard that's been an issue for a while now for us, and it doesn't seem to be calming down anytime soon. Certainly not before November, and probably not for a while thereafter. And I don't know, to be perfectly candid, whether we are even able to have a serious discussion about the sort of the quantum sort of quantum attraction opportunities under these circumstances or not. My guess is probably not. And that's unfortunate, but that's the way things are. Going back once again to the space program, we very intentionally and very aggressively brought over essentially the German space program, and that was really the genesis in virtually every respect of our own space program. At the same time, we brought over a tremendous amount of the Manhattan Project, and that worked out really, really well for us. Those were extraordinarily special circumstances, but we knew then the value of letting people come here, and indeed pulling people over here by some fairly extraordinary means to work on national priority R&D. And so we've done this before, and I don't think there's anything other than a political reason why we can't do something much more limited now. But that political reason is a big one.
Paul, as you're talking through it, my brain cells are moving, stimulating, and it just started to occur to me. One thing I've noticed in the quantum space is that even the big boys, and especially now COVID and the startups, I'm finding fewer and fewer times I'm finding when I talk to people in the industry that they live at the headquarters. So, their workforce, and who knows where this all settles down after the COVID mess, but their workforce is frankly physically all over the place, different countries even. And so, that may be a way to get around the problems, the issues the United States is facing right now. Now, somebody like Sean, the attraction might be to come to the United States because it is a pretty good gig here relative to many other countries, for example. But but you don't my point is that if you want to get into the quantum space, you could easily work for an American company in a foreign country, and that may be potentially a norm in this industry. Because we're being born during COVID, and it's becoming quite acceptable nowadays. So you may not need an American visa necessarily. You'll need, it depends on what you're working on, but you don't need to be here to play in our playground.
Hey, Terrell, I'll just throw out this comment that the majority of the grad students in the U.S., applied for a student visa to get over here. So it's another way into the U.S.
Yeah. I mean, it depends what your objective is. If you want to work in quantum in the quantum industry, the point is you don't need to come here. But if you want to come here, that's a different, and where quantum is the secondary objective. If quantum's a first objective, I got a possible solution we might be able to work with. Can I just ask one question, Paul? I mean, my assumption is, my belief is that we have big tech here in the United States on the side of this question of bringing in non-U.S. citizens into the technology workspace. Is that still true or accurate?
Yeah, it is still true, but that doesn't get you anywhere. That is, big tech has always been on that side, essentially.
Yeah.
Because who wouldn't want a looser labor market as a company, right? They've always been on that side, and here we are.
Yeah.
And so what wins is the national security argument. And we are trying and have been trying to make the case over years that the national security, the better national security policy is one that moves from hermetically sealing the United States to a much more nuanced approach. And it's a hard approach, but to give you an idea of how long we've been working on this, the hermetic seal discussion was one that I had with my professor at the Kennedy School in 2000. His name was Ash Carter. He went on to be the Secretary of Defense, and he couldn't fix it. He pushed things along those lines, but it is a very difficult thing. Let me put it this way: we are extraordinarily and to a large degree properly risk averse about this, but we need to pay attention to the fact and really think through the fact that there are trade-offs here, and that the trade-off structure has changed since the export control regime was put in place. And we're seeing right now the Commerce Department, for example, has put out a set of new technologies that they're going to be considering how to add to it's called the CCL, the Commerce Control List. Quantum is on that list, and we've seen that early additions to that list have been made in a way that is very nuanced and very careful. We expect the same to be true of quantum, but it's a very delicate thing. This is a dance, by the way, as many of you know, between the Defense Department, the Department of State, and the Department of Commerce. It's a very, and it all takes place well behind the scenes in ways that are very hard to interact with, and certainly very hard to influence. And yet we are trying to across a number of different fronts.
I just don't understand why we all can't just get along and start writing quantum circuits or something,
Oh, if men were angels, government wouldn't be needed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it is. I mean, it is a real challenge. Since we're on the slide, I'll just return to what I forget who brought it up originally at the beginning of the conversation, but we do need to keep generating intellectual property and to protect it not just legally but from theft. China has a national policy of intellectual property theft, and so we need to be able to protect our IP to the maximum extent possible. One of the things that we see quite frequently is engagement from the FBI at functions like this one. Certainly at the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, QEDC, there are frequent presentations by the FBI showing what Chinese agents, Chinese companies, and the PLA and the Chinese Communist Party itself are doing to try to get a hold of U.S. companies, U.S. IP, both through economic means and through industrial espionage. We need to be careful about that.
I refer to it as second mover advantage.
Yes. I think it was the game Civilization, where if you got the Library of Alexandria, you could get any technology that any two other players had. And it's a very powerful thing. So yes, we see that happening. We need to watch out for it. By the way, going back to workforce development, and Sean, to your question, I have to plug the Hudson Institute's Quantum Alliance Initiative. They are focused on what we do with our allies and on breaking down those barriers between the United States and first the Five Eyes, second the NATO alliance, and third our friends around the world, with the explicit goal of working together for mutual benefit and sort of leadership in the U.S.-led multipolarity that we're in at the moment. So I strongly recommend anybody check that out who wants to. I'm on the advisory board, and I think they're doing fantastic work, led by Arthur Herman. I had a whole bunch of slides on the National Quantum Initiative Act if we needed to go through that, but I can also just stick to thank you and the contact information. And I'd be just delighted to hear other questions and comments from the audience if you like.
Yeah, any of you holding back, now's your chance.
Well, and thanks for the link to the Quantum Alliance Initiative in the chat.
Thanks for the lead. I'll be contacting Arthur. You may want to give him a heads up.
Among other things, Arthur's a prolific author. He wrote a number of books, one on the U.S. Industrial advantage in World War II, and he just finished one on the Vikings. The World War II one actually is a bestseller and has done quite nicely. So check him out.
Which is the one? What is he just finishing up?
One on the Vikings. I'm trying to.
The Vikings?
Yeah.
Isn't that a little outdated? Just kidding.
Yeah, I sent him an email about a week ago. Haven't heard back from him yet.
Oh, Arthur,
he did mention that you were doing this presentation and invited him to do a follow-up.
Yeah. The Viking Heart, it's called, How Scandinavians Conquered the World. It's coming out, it's in pre-release right now, I believe, coming out soon.
Oh, he'll be doing a speaking tour, so that'll be an incentive to push the book. But
yeah.
Those of you out there in listener land, Tom and I were working the case already, thanks to Tom's lead on that.
Yeah, Freedom's Forge is the other book that's that was in 2012, very highly regarded, about U.S. industrial policy in World War II.
So, Paul, I have a question.
Yes.
Hey, Tony.
Hello. What are your thoughts on Japan in this space and with some of the items that you mentioned?
So, I've been mildly surprised in that Japan's been relatively quiet on the quantum front, and I don't mean that they're quiet sort of overall. It's just I might have expected a little more, considering their overarching technological capability. I think there's been a fair amount going on there, and we have a lot of back and forth. In fact, if I recall correctly, Arthur had was it the Japanese ambassador speak at the Quantum Alliance Initiative. So there's plenty going on, but I almost expected by now that Japan would be even more of a leader here. Certainly, I think it's vital that we cooperate with Japan and with Japanese companies as much as we possibly can. Do you have a particular angle that you're sort of chasing on this?
Yeah, I mean, in particular, they're probably, arguably, the world's leader on quantum-based atomic clocks, which is one of those aspects that you mentioned on an earlier slide in the near term quantum sensing space. And Japanese industry in particular is from a patenting perspective, they have an enormous number of patents in that space. They're also quite powerful in quantum mechanical based magnetometers. So I've had an opportunity to do some patent related work in this area, and it's actually pretty enlightening. I mean, the U.S. government's already lost. The game's already over. There's some very specific things that they themselves have some control over, but it's all the big companies, it's all the Japanese companies, it's all now in China. On the other hand, you have a tremendous amount of really high quality Chinese university work coming out of Beijing University and Chinese Academy of Sciences. So the patents tell a particularly interesting and maybe not so happy story about where some of this is headed.
Well, I think that's certainly it's certainly a sobering story, the IP story, and that's a big part of why workforce development is so important. We have to have the people power and the brain power to develop our own pipeline, and we're not competing at the level that we need to be to ensure long-term leadership. I think is fair to call that an understatement, and that's a big part of why it's so urgent for us. Certainly, Japan's PNT efforts are impressive, and I think IBM has done a tremendous amount of work in Tokyo as well. So I know there's a lot of sort of U.S. Japan collaboration on the private sector side. But no, I mean you're right, and that's the fact that the U.S. government is not the 800-pound gorilla that it once was, in large part just by virtue of growth elsewhere, including in the U.S. private sector, means that it needs to change the way it interacts, and means that some of the things that were helpful previously are harmful now. And so that's part of what we're trying to help the government navigate.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul. Keeper here. I have a question about quantum education in K through 12.
Sure.
And what steps are we taking to introduce these quantum concepts to the kids, and how are we planning to train teachers to optimize their teaching of quantum ideas?
Yeah. So thank you for that. Good to have you on the line. And one of my coalition members has written Quantum Computing for Babies. So we do try to reach as far down the stack as we can in terms of STEM education and quantum. But I think the real answer is one of the most important things that we can do, and I was actually guilty of this as I was sort of starting all this up myself, is we have to avoid creating the impression that quantum is impossible to understand, and that it's just super hard, and when really what it is it's a different way of thinking. And I've found that if I can really start from certain basics and explain the technology, the principles, and so forth in a series of analogies related to hammers, saws, and coins, that I can get people to a reasonably decent functional understanding of sort of how things work, and from there, you can carry on into the math and so forth. At that point, I bail and go back to law and policy. But I think just not erecting that barrier in the first place is a really big step.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. I think that we need to demystify and also loop in the different, the mathematics and the technology, and really allow people to see where quantum actually overlaps with all of these different topics. I think is really important.
Yeah, and I think that there's a bit of an incentive to not do that. Oh, look at me, I've mastered this abstruse and impossible realm of quantum physics. There's a certain cachet to that, right? Just like rocket science, which is reasonably hard, and brain surgery, sort of, I'm involved in something like that. But that's not how you get other people into it. And so I think a big part of it is lowering that barrier to entry, and then another big part of it is showing what you can do with it. If there are, again, if there are careers out the back end that are, that are remunerative, that are interesting, that are getting attention for doing interesting, cool things that matter, then that will attract folks as well. And then I think just clarifying the pathway and shortening that pathway. Another part of it is, as I talked about, sort of the increasing scope of the places you can get involved in quantum. It's not all going to be quantum PhDs in the near future. You're going to be able to engage as a programmer. You're going to be able to engage as a data entry person. You're going to be able to engage as a quantum communicator, as a marketer, and that's going to be helpful as well. There will be ways that technicians and all sorts of different folks can engage at all sorts of different levels, and I think that'll be useful.
Yeah, if I can add to that. By the way, I'm trying to socialize the term quantum enabled for that part of the workforce you described, and that's really, what my passion is the quantum enabled, not the PhDs, because we got a great system in America for that now, but it's that quantum enabled crowd, which actually is a larger number in the workforce as the industry matures. Yeah. But allow me to just toss this out for thought. As Keeper mentioned, or you probably did too, Paul, in that, when it comes to the high school teaching, you want to, the knee-jerk reaction is to teach the teachers, teach the physics teachers, teach the math teachers. I think in this country in particular, as we can probably all agree, our K through 12 system is extremely overloaded, not to mention the COVID stuff. And, put yourself in their shoes, as wonderful as it might be, it would be really hard to give more to these poor souls. God help them, God bless them, on top of what they're already trying to do. So my thinking for conversation's sake is for quantum, and I'm starting to see this pop up in, and I've only been in this biz 14 months now. So being a newcomer, you kind of see things a little sooner than those who are, the fish in the water, if you will. But there is a growing, a mounting community out there who are looking at the K through 12 education and actually developing programs for
my kid's an only child,
so rather than trying to hey, keep her. So trying to give more for the teachers to do, there's this side channel that may take on that role, which I think is pretty interesting.
I think you're right. I've ventured about as far into education policy as I dare. But I'm glad you're taking it up, and I imagine a lot of the folks on here are doing the same to one degree or another, and I appreciate that.
I'm glad you're thinking about it too. So anyway, we are on some serious overtime here, Paul. I didn't mean to keep you this long, but that's a good sign. That's a good sign.
And thanks to all who have stuck with us. Certainly, please feel free to reach out either directly or through the website. If you have any follow-up questions, if you're involved with the company that would like to participate, anything along those lines, certainly happy to continue the conversation in that form.
Oh, cool. If I can represent us grassroots community, if there's anything we can do to help you in your mission, we've got a growing community here, and if there's something we can do to help your cause, let me and others know, and we'll see what we can pull together, because this is a cool ecosystem, I think, a very unique one in my view.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
So thanks again for your time, everybody. Thanks for playing today and joining us in this discussion, and maybe we'll have Paul back to report on some success and maybe a change of strategy for our government here in the United States someday down the road. We'll see if that occurs. But thanks everybody for attending. Paul, again, thank you very much, and it was a pleasure having you today, and I hope to meet you someday in DC when things calm down. So everybody have a good day, and we'll see you next time somewhere, some quantum space. Thanks for coming by.
Take care.
Bye.